Okay, Gideon Levy and Stephen Bonnell, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
I've spoken to both of you individually, and I've really enjoyed those discussions. I find you both to be very intelligent, good faith people with different understandings about the history of Israel-Palestine and different ideas for what a solution should look like. That being said, I know from speaking to both of you, I really believe that both of you respect Israelis, you both respect Palestinians, and you both want the best for both people. And you also have very different ideas of what has transpired over history and who's to blame in different events and what should be done moving forward. And just for a quick introduction for both of you and for the audience, Gideon Levy is an Israeli columnist for Haaretz, often speaks and writes in criticism of Israeli policies. And Destiny, or Stephen Bonnell, rose to fame through his online streaming. And Gideon, I had mentioned this to you over text, was that Stephen Bonnell had done a debate on the Lex Friedman show where he spoke alongside Moeen Rabbani, Norman Finkelstein, and Benny Morris. So the first question, and maybe the only question I want to ask, is I want to understand why you both have a different perspective about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Gideon, and if by the way, if anything I say is incorrect, just correct me. But Gideon, the gestalt of what I learned from our discussion, I think, is your point of view is that the history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been one in which Israel has subjugated Palestinians to ethnic cleansing, to occupation, to oppression, and various forms of that. Whereas, Stephen, you acknowledge that Israel has done things that are bad, but fundamentally, you see Israel more or less as a righteous country who's fighting for their right to be independent, and the measures they've taken, for the most part, have been for security. In other words, you don't see Israel as being sort of fundamentally perpetuating a suffering on the Palestinians without being driven by their own security. So that's what I want to tackle today. What is the difference in those two narratives? Gideon, let me pass it to you. Have I correctly summarized your view?
Basically, yes.
Okay. And maybe you could just say a little bit about your viewpoint to have Stephen respond to.
So I think that it's about time to start from the beginning. Sorry for my voice today. In the beginning is not 67, but 1948, and even earlier. I had once a girlfriend, a Palestinian girlfriend, and we were going around the beaches of Tel Aviv. And then she said, imagine yourself that now 1 million refugees are coming to this land and take it over. That's the Palestinian experience. They might understand the Holocaust, the history, but from their point of view, we came and took their land. And there is very little to say against it. Now, the beginning could have been different. The beginning was inevitable. My father came as a refugee to this place, running away from Hitler. He had no other place to go. He was half a year on the sea without having any opportunity to get to anywhere. But from the beginning, Zionism turned back to the Palestinian. The people without land arrived in a land with people while there was there. And ever since then, we are turning our back to their rights, and we are doing anything possible either to kick them away and for sure not give them equal rights. And here I am.
But Stephen, the way that Gideon, I think, characterizes the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict is what, Gideon? It's that Israel has been the one perpetuating ethnic cleansing for 75 years, has been enforcing a blockade that they've had no right to enforce, has been expanding into the West Bank, right? And you think that's unjustified because this is a people that was living there, and the Israelis and the Jews came in and started occupying land without a sincere desire for peace or for a reasonable solution with the Palestinians. They just wanted to take land. Is that accurate?
No, Jake. The Jews had no other choice but to come here, but they could have done it in a different way. And they started this whole project by kicking them away. In the 20s, Jews kicked away Palestinians from the jobs before the Holocaust, before everything. They called it conquering the labor. That's not a way to get to a populated land. That's not a way to live with another people who has at least the same rights that you have.
Yeah. And so Gideon, whereas you are critical of Israeli policies, occupation, and military actions, I think that, Stephen, your view is that a lot of these circumstances, it's Israel exerting their right to self-defense, rather than Israel just trying to oppress Palestinians. I mean, are you guys in total agreement about the history of Israel?
Well, yeah, I feel like you're summarizing my position very harshly. Me and Gideon might agree a fair bit on this, actually. Something that people have a really hard time with when it comes to history is analysis without, I guess, like moral judgment, or the idea that two different parties can both have adequate justification for like contrary desires, right? So, I mean, as Gideon points out, I feel like it's fair that Jewish people wanted to immigrate to the Levant starting in the 1880s, and they did a lot of work internationally to secure rights from Great Britain, with the Balfour Declaration saying we're going to have a land here. The Ottoman Empire lost in World War I. They collapsed. Britain had a mandate to rule this land. Jewish people were fleeing persecution from around the world, eventually into fleeing the Holocaust. So it's hard to say that like Jewish people were wrong or, morally in the wrong for that desire to immigrate and to more or less secure it through, whatever financial or diplomatic means, they needed to, at least with the people that owned that land at the time, which was the mandate was from Great Britain from 1917 afterwards. That being said, it would be ignorant to stop there because on the Arab side, your empire has collapsed, the Turks no longer rule you, and then you look and you see that Egypt has, their state there that they got. Iraq is getting their state. Jordan is getting their state. Lebanon and Syria are getting their states. But then in your area, a whole bunch of European immigrants seem to be coming in. And what's more, the people that have the mandate to rule that land are telling you, well, they're going to come and live here and you guys need to figure that out, until eventually in 37, they were like, okay, well, this is probably not going to work anymore. It seems like this is, it's unworkable. Or it's become unworkable. So I think the issue is I feel like both sides had good justification early on. Now people can go back and forth on the details. Gideon brings up the conquest of labor. You could argue that early Zionists, the Jewish agency, buying land and then expelling Arabs and then bringing in Jews to work the land was immoral. But I feel like if it would have gone the other way, if they would have purchased the land and then Jewish owners would have come in and had Arabs work, people would call it slavery, right? So, I don't know if the conquest of labor, if that idea is necessarily bad or not. I think you could probably go both ways on it. I just think the early history is muddy enough that you can pick out clear points to make either side seem wholly good or wholly evil. And a lot of the debate about history is just picking and choosing the particular events that you want and then saying that side is completely in the wrong. So today they need to give up everything and basically leave, which is the frustrating. I think it's frustrating when it comes to the historical analysis, I think, of the region.
And you don't think that Israel is an apartheid state, whereas Gideon, I think you believe Israel is an apartheid state. Is that correct? Oh. So, Stephen, why is it not an apartheid state?
When I think of apartheid, I think of two things. I think one is I think of a form of racial domination that is like explicitly and avowedly like racial in character. And two, I think of it as like a state dealing with its citizens. So a state controls all of its citizens and it says this race is better than this race and that race is better than that race and that's it. when I look at the situations going on in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, it seems like it's less of a racial domination thing and more of a, this is contested occupied territory. Israeli citizens, whether they're Arab Palestinians or whether they're Jewish or whether they're, whatever ethnicity, if you're an Israeli citizen, you're guaranteed or afforded these rights. If you're not, if you're a Palestinian, then you are afforded a different set of rights, an inferior set of rights if you live in the West Bank. Effectively, is it apartheid? Like, it has characteristics that look similar to it, but the way that you fix apartheid is by going into a state and ending the racial domination. The way that you fix the situation in Israel and Palestine is figuring out a permanent solution on both sides that resolves, hopefully in two states. You can't get rid of the apartheid without getting rid of the territorial dispute, basically. But once the territorial dispute is gone, I would imagine the apartheid would disappear soon after, I would hope.
But Gideon, you believe in a one-state solution, not a two-state solution, right? Why is that?
No, I'm a great believer in the two-state solution, but Israel spoiled it. Israel left no room for a Palestinian state. The two-state solution is fantastic. But I would like to tell Stephen, I don't know if you've been here. Have you ever been here?
Yeah, I was there for 2 weeks, a few months ago, yeah.
I wish I could go around with you to the occupied territories. And you would see in your own eyes two villages, one next to the other. One village, which its inhabitants has all the rights in the world, all the resources, citizenship, freedom of movement, everything. And the village next to it, no rights, no citizenship of any state in the world, no citizenship, no freedom of movement, nothing, no election, freedom of vote, nothing. How else can you call it if not apartheid? How can you call it? Now, would it be a temporary situation? I would totally agree with you. Occupation is temporary by definition. But after 55 years or 60 years, when Israel shows no intention from wall to wall to put an end to the situation, you can't help it. It is apartheid. It looks like apartheid. It behaves like apartheid. And it is apartheid.
I agree. You could definitely see the difference between, I guess, like the official settlements versus Palestinian villages. I haven't gone everywhere, but in the West Bank, we visited Nablus and Yitzhar. We went to Ramallah. We went to it was the Jewish area of Hebron, but you could see the Palestinian area, and there are differences between all the checkpoints. I wish I could remember the name of the checkpoint coming in from East Jerusalem to West Jerusalem, and the hour or 2 hour wait versus the private checkpoints that Israeli citizens can just drive through instantly. There is a huge difference. I agree. It's not good. It's a problem. I just think that it's apartheid will never be solved without solving the territorial dispute. There's never going to be a situation where Israel is giving equal rights to non-citizens that live in the West Bank or the Gaza. It'll never happen. Whereas if the territorial dispute gets solved, I would expect that any difference in rights or whatever would immediately follow. It would have to be part of the negotiation. That's why I feel like fixating on the apartheid part just doesn't make as much sense, because there's no progress to be made there, I feel.
I totally agree. The only mistake you make is that Israel has any intention to solve the territorial problem. Israel located 700,000 Jewish settlers there and is continuing to build settlements there. This means that Israel has no intention ever to solve the territorial problem, and you will even have to admit that we are in apartheid. How many years more do you need to realize that Israel has no intention to give up any land? Another 50 years, another 200 years. When will you say, oh, they really don't mean it, and it is apartheid?
I agree, Israel. I think the problem, is both sides are incentivized to kind of fight forever. I think that Israel enjoys, at least under a right-wing coalition, even left-wing kind of, but I think Israel enjoys the idea of perpetual conflict because it means more and more settlers move into the West Bank. potentially more of Area C gets annexed in the future. It means a smaller state for Palestinians if it ever comes. I agree that that's definitely a problem on the Israeli side. But I mean, I would say on the Palestinian side, there's never been like an acceptance or a clear delineation of this is what we want. This is an agreement that we would settle with. It feels like on the Palestinian side, there's a desire to fight into perpetuity as well, that there is an infinite rejection of any type of Israeli state existing too. I feel like the international community has hurt that in driving both sides to feel like they can kind of fight for what they want forever when a lot of what they want is mutually exclusionary.
I'm sorry, I cannot accept the idea of symmetry. There is no symmetry between the raper and the woman who is raped. There is no symmetry. There is the raper and there is the woman who is raped. You cannot compare. You cannot compare the occupier, the colonizer, to the victim and say, oh, they don't agree, so they both carry the same responsibility. No. There is one responsible, and this is the occupier, and he does anything possible not to end the occupation ever. Now we are speaking about settlements in Gaza. Wait half a year, you'll see settlers in Gaza. Wait another year, there will be settlers in Lebanon. And you still believe that the territorial problem will be solved? I don't have any disagreement with you. The only thing is that you have to realize that Israel has no intention to solve it.
I mean the reality is a lot of this occupation came after the result of failed military conquest, right? Whether it was the Arab states, whether it was the 6-Day War, whether it was continual fighting in the occupied territories, like it's always been on the backs of more and more and more military conflict. So it's hard to say that, like if Israel had just conquered territory, you know, after rejecting peace over and over again, or after rejecting peace agreements, or after rejecting partition plans or deals, I think that there might be a better argument there. But I mean, when the other side has continued to reject peace agreements and then fought for conquests and then lost and then said, well, now we're the rape victims, I don't think that the analogy fits one-to-one there. I think that there has to be impetus on both sides to come to the table and try to figure out some sort of peace agreement. I agree, Israel's not doing enough to come to the table and make a peace agreement. But I mean, like, are we to say that like Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas have done great jobs at coming to the table and trying to negotiate for peace as well? I don't think you could. I don't think that's a fair statement to make.
I don't think it's about peace. I think, first of all, it's about justice and following the international law. And Israel is violating the international law and distracting any sense of justice or equality between 7.5 million Palestinians who live between the river and the sea and 7.5 million Jews who live between the river and the sea. We are equal in figures, and there is the Jewish supremacy which kills everything, and Israel has no intention to change it. And therefore, to speak with all the respect I have a lot of respect to you, as you know, you are from the UN. Well, both parties should negotiate. It's even not about this. It's about creating justice. Did you say it about the blacks and the whites in South Africa? Did you say they carry the same responsibility? Did you blame the blacks that they didn't negotiate with the whites?
No, but I don't think the South Africa situation is comparable. I don't think that the Palestinian starting position is comparable to the ANC. I don't think that, I feel like that's a bad equivalency. I think that's been drawn for 50, 60 some years. I think that, I mean, we can speak about international law, but the reality is nobody in that region takes international law seriously whatsoever. So the idea that the impetus is on Israel to follow, you know, whatever UN resolutions, when you've got, you know, mass slaughter of Syrians to the north, when you've got starving children by the tens of thousands in Yemen and the southeast, when you've got Hamas that's being funded and supported by the Houthis, by Hezbollah, by Iran, by Assad. I think that the idea that, like, well, Israel needs to follow international law and just do X, Y, and Z when no one else in the region is going to. Historically, that's just never how any of the peace agreements in that region have gone. With Sadat and with the King of Jordan, the peace agreements that Israel's made with other countries haven't been because of international law. It's because leaders have stepped up and gotten together and really hammered out, like, this is what an agreement is going to look like. And I don't know. I mean, the real elephant in the room is the right of return. I don't know if Palestinians are ever able to accept any sort of like long-term peace agreement that forgoes this infinite right of return for the land of Israel. Or maybe you're in agreement that they should be allowed to have 4, 5, 6 million people come back into Israel proper. Or you don't think that? Do you think that Israel should exist as like a state for Jewish people, or should that idea be abolished?
Israel abolished it. You can't be a Jewish state and control an equal size people without any rights. You want a Jewish state, you have to have a Jewish majority. We don't have it anymore. So what kind of Jewish state is it? I don't need a Jewish state. I need a democracy. I need a just place. But let's leave it. Those who dream about the Jewish state should separate from the Palestinians. If they don't do it, they are leading an apartheid state.
Do you think the majority of Jews would feel comfortable in Israel living in like a state that no longer explicitly protects like a Jewish character, like one that's just a pure democracy with an equal, or where Jews are an ethnic minority?
I think that in New York you could live very easily and feel the Jewish nature of New York. What does this have to do with politics? We will be here in Jewish. I mean, whoever wants to feel Jewish can feel Jewish in New York and can feel Jewish in Israel. Many ways you feel more Jewish in New York than in Israel. The Orthodox feel more Jewish in New York than in Israel. But in any case, it's not about religion. It's about being a democracy. You mentioned all the countries around, according to the international law. The only difference between Syria and Yemen and Libya and all those countries is that Israel claims that it is part of the West, that it is the only democracy in the Middle East. We are not compared to Syria. We are the darling of the West. We are financed by the West and supported by the West and armed by the West. But we are not ready to accept the basic values of the international community. Nobody thinks that Syria is part of the liberal world, but Israel is. And in its backyard, it has this brutal regime. So how can it go on like this? You suggest the Palestinians will wait another 10 generations until something will happen. What do you suggest to a young man of your age who lives now in Jenin or in Gaza? What is he supposed to do?
I mean, I understand what you're saying about how Israel fancies itself as a Western nation and should live up to maybe a different set of standards. But I mean, the reality is Israel is also surrounded by nations that don't hold themselves to that standard, and I feel like that's it's a challenging situation to navigate. Insofar as, I mean, what do you suggest for young Palestinians to do? I mean, there's a whole ethos, there's a whole history of a kind of attitude, I guess, towards the existence of Israel. But I guess in my mind, and obviously I don't live there, but the feeling I get in reading and talking to people and looking at the political discourse and looking at the historical political discourse is it feels like the Palestinians there have never truly accepted the idea that any Israeli state will ever exist. And as long as that idea is not only pervasive, but in a way kind of encouraged by the international community, I feel like you're giving them enough to just keep the conflict alive. Why try to build, another state? Why try to build a city that's prosperous? Or why try to do anything when the whole goal needs to be resistance, and fighting against Israel?
How many Israelis do you think accept an existence of a Palestinian state, accept the fact that Palestinians are human beings? How many Israelis are like this? You really think it's the majority?
I mean, situations on the ground can change fast. I don't know what the current polling is. I don't think there's high polling for 2 states for either side. But historically, if you look at negotiations between Arafat, between Mahmoud Abbas, it doesn't seem like the Palestinians have ever put anything on the table saying this is what we would accept for a 2-state solution. This is the type of deal that we would accept. It's always this like reject, accept 2 years later, and then continue the conflict. Like I don't know what the actual if I were to ask, do you know what what is it that Palestinians would want that would satisfy them for some type of final arrangement?
What would the Israelis want?
I mean, it feels like for Israelis, it feels like the general agreement is some kind of security arrangement that leaves them feeling comfortable in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So whether this is, I think in Taba Summit, it was like 3 military outposts or whatever, and maybe control of the airspace to be handed off over time. It looks like some form of, I think in the West Bank, they want to do land swaps in order to keep the big settlement blocks near the Green Line. I think that settlements that are deep in should just be destroyed, in my opinion. I don't know if they would go with that or not. And then some sort of limitation on the right of return, which is a big one. And then some sort of access or visitation to the Western Wall without that being heavily restricted. It feels like it's like something in that ballpark. I feel like the Israeli government, I feel like, would accept.
So why didn't he do anything about it?
Well, I think they tried in Camp David. They tried with Olmert and Abbas.
They only built more settlements. That's the only thing that they really done. They built more and more settlements in order to sabotage any chance for partition. What Israel is saying is totally irrelevant. Israel and the Labour and the Likud did anything possible to prevent any chance of partition.
I agree. The expansion of the settlements, I think it was a disaster in the West Bank. I don't think anybody, nobody intelligent should just...
Who is to be blamed on this?
Who can be blamed for this? I mean, people that want to push settlements into the West Bank, right? I think I wish I could remember.
We all carry this responsibility. All of us Israelis are settlers because we enabled this.
Sure, but I mean, the Israeli argument is that violence never completely stopped from the Palestinians, that Arafat was always, hungry to push another deal off and see violence erupt, in the Second Intifada from 2000 to 2004-05, that, there's always been this kind of like the Fedayeen mindset of like the attacks and the pressure and everything else. So, I mean, I feel like depending on where you want to pick and choose from, both sides can say, look, they messed it up. Israel kept expanding the West Bank. Palestinians kept doing terror attacks. And every time one side would kind of like control their side a little bit more, the other side would push more. And it's like this back and forth. And it feels like if people are looking for excuses, there's always a reason to blame somebody and then not do anything, which I feel is just really toxic.
You mentioned security. What's about the security of the Palestinian people? Who is about to guard, to protect the 3 million people of Gaza? Who is about to protect them? Who is about to protect the 3 million people of the West Bank? What about their security? They are in 100 times more danger than we Israelis. What about their security? They don't have the right for self-defense, don't they?
I mean, the issue is bad right now. I agree it's not ideal, but if you were to swap it, like, who do you think lives in more security? Do you think Palestinians in the West Bank living under Israeli, subjugation, or if it was Jewish people living in the West Bank living under Palestinian subjugation? If Palestinians owned Israel and the Jews were in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, do you think the situation would look the same or worse?
But we are speaking about a certain situation in which 40,000 people are slaughtered in Gaza, and the whole world speaks about the security for Israel. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. I think that the fear is that, at least historically, it made more sense that Israel was a state that was looking at enemies on all sides and is facing potential annihilation at any point in time, where its people can't go anywhere else because they felt like they've been victims of the world. How true is that narrative today? Probably not as true as it was in the 30s and 40s. Probably not as true as it was in the 6-Day War in Yom Kippur. But I think there's some truth to that, which is why I think, like I said, if we were to look at, there are more Arabs living in Israel today, like 10 times more, 100 times more than Jews living in every other Arab country combined. I think that Jewish people, are understandably fearful of being a minority in a country that they're in, especially if it's ran by Arab citizens. I think that's a fair fear to have. Do you think that's like a fair worry to have?
They are more than welcome to pull out from the Palestinian areas, and then they will be very safe. There will be a majority.
Or sure, I was thinking in terms of because it feels like any peace agreement that the Palestinians want to make demand like an unlimited right of return to the land of Israel. That's what it feels like. I don't think there's ever been a Palestinian delegation or a negotiator that has said that they're willing to give up some amount of right of return. So it feels like there's always like 5 to 7 million Palestinians having the right to move back into Israel proper, if any, like a peace agreement is actually made.
except of one Palestinian, and his name is Mahmoud Abbas, who said it clearly that he gives up the right of return. He gave up his dream to go back to his hometown. But why would I have the right to settle everywhere and they don't have the right to settle everywhere in their land? Why? Because we are what?
I mean, Olmert would contest that, right? And I don't know how true it is that Abbas in 2008 accepted that he would limit the right of return. I think from Olmert's telling of the story is that he gave a number. I don't remember what it was, 75,000 or 50. He gave some number, and then Abbas didn't respond. They didn't show up to draw maps or anything the next day. And then 2 years later, I mean, as happened with Arafat over and over again, Abbas says, "Oh, well, I would have accepted this," but by then Olmert is out of office. I think in 2010, I think you had Netanyahu at that point, and now you're in a whole new government, and anything you negotiated in the past is just completely off the table.
We are speaking of two different levels. You are talking about the diplomatic level, and I'm talking about basic justice, about basic equality, about basic values. And this interests me 10 times more than what Abbas declared or not. I want to live in a just state, and I don't live in a just state. I live in an apartheid state. And this will not be solved through diplomatic arrangements. It will be solved, first of all, when Israel will realize what we have done to the Palestinian people over the last 100 years. Until we realize this, we cannot get to anything. And we don't realize it, we deny it. And you really reflect all the talking points of the Israeli propaganda, which is fine. I was in your place when I was young. I believed in everything you said until I realized that my brain was warped for years. I was told we are the Gideon, they are the Goliath, that they want to kill us, that they were born to kill, that we are the just ones and only the just ones, that we are the ultimate victims. All those things I was told until I started to look around and to realize that I was brainwashed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Israel are the ultimate victims. I agree. I think that especially the very Zionists, the far right people play it up a bit. And I think to speak to that, I mean, on October 7th, it's not like you had a bunch of Palestinians in Israel or the West Bank rise up and join in some massive third intifada. I think that's a huge achievement. I think it shows a lot to the mindset of the Palestinians living in Israel and the West Bank, that they're not all trying to kill all the Jews. I agree with that. But I mean, nothing historically in this region has ever come from some group of people just realizing a thing, right? It took commitments from Carter and Sadat to get Begin to come to the table and figure out peace with Egypt. And that only came after Israel's troubling performance in 73, right? In the Yom Kippur War. And it took the fall of the Soviet Union and the Madrid Peace Conference and talks with Jordan to finally get Israel to have peace with Jordan as well. Like, none of these things just happened spontaneously. Like, they were off the backs of either large wars or big, like, diplomatic efforts by leaders that were willing to stake out really brave positions. And I think that has to happen rather than expecting like a sudden change in consciousness from the entire society to change a particular thing.
So by and large, Stephen, you are comfortable with the state that did a mass killing. I don't want to use the word genocide, even though it has genocidal elements, who killed masses of people in Gaza, who distracted the whole Gaza Strip, who is now doing the same in Lebanon. You are comfortable with this. You really believe that it's all because of self-defense, the right for self-defense. You really believe that Israel is still the victim and the Palestinians are the evil ones. I don't know where to start even.
I mean, I'm not comfortable with it. It needs to change, but just paying lip service to it and saying it's a horrible state of affairs doesn't do anything. If that would have worked, then we would have seen peace between Israel and the Palestinians 24 years ago with the Abbas. We would have seen peace, with Arafat. We would have seen peace with the Abbas. We would have seen peace with the Great March of Return. Like, it just doesn't happen. There has to be leadership that takes a brave step to change the state of affairs. And until both sides feel that impetus, that pressure, nothing is going to change. Just pointing at the situation and going, this is so bad, it hasn't done anything yet. Why would we expect it to do anything in the future?
My main complaint to you is that you look at both sides as symmetrical, and they are not. I try to explain it, and I'm trying again. We are not two symmetrical parties who are struggling over one piece of land. Long time not. We are the brutal, forceful, strong, regional state, regional superpower vis-a-vis people who live without any protection under the very brutal Israeli boot for decades now. And whatever he tried failed. They tried extreme resistance, they tried diplomacy, they tried the legal arena. Wherever they try, they have no understanding. And how do you get out of it? If you deal with both parties as equals, you get nowhere because we are not equals. There is the occupier and there is its victim. And nobody can deny it now anymore after so many years.
Okay. Yeah, where do you want to go, Jake? All right, because I feel like we can. I mean, I think we understand each other's
I'm
disagreements.
to the point, but I think so. So Gideon feels that because Israel is the occupier and because Palestinians are the victim, the onus is on Israel to institute peace and change because it's Israel that has these people
Please.
justice
Peace will be the moment. Maybe
because
not peace.
because it's Israel that has control over these people and their water and their electricity, and they are way, way, way more powerful. And so the idea that both parties share equal responsibility for coming to the table diplomatically to institute justice and change, Gideon says, is just not rational. It's just not fair because Israel has so much. Israel's the winner in this situation. It's
but what's the alternative then? Does Israel force a peace agreement upon the Palestinians? Like, I don't understand what is the alternative besides both sides coming to the table to negotiate something?
The solution is realizing that they are equal human beings and draw the conclusion. The conclusion is that Israel cannot do whatever it wants only because it is stronger. The conclusion is that not everything can be solved by violence. The conclusion is that not every injustice can be solved by another war. And the conclusion is that it's time to change the mindset of Israel before any diplomatic negotiations about the location of the border or about the outpost which will stay and the outpost which will be evacuated. First of all, I would like to see Israel realizing that it's not the only people around, and they are so far from realizing it. And therefore, it's about the international community to intervene. Also in South Africa, the whites would have never given up if not the international community intervenes, because the international community saying apartheid will not prevail in our world. And now it's the time to do the same with the second apartheid state. You say it's not yet an apartheid state. You need more time to be sure. How many years? I don't know. The Palestinians cannot wait, but you can wait. Wait another 10 years and then we'll meet again and we'll tell you, you know what? It is an apartheid state. And then what? The world should just accept it and continue to finance it.
Why do you disagree, Stephen? Seems like there's a fundamental disagreement here. I mean, I think, but I don't think.
There's like realizing something is bad doesn't. What does that mean? Like, what does that materialize in? Like,
I think
some kind of agreement. Like,
so Gideon, what is your proposal? Like, in make it as sort of material as possible. You know, is your proposal that Israel withdraws from the West Bank and lifts the blockade? What in specific terms? What would the solution look like?
Specific terms can be, first of all, putting an end to the siege of Gaza. That's out of the question. This should be the first step I would take. Secondly, freezing all the settlements, not building one terrace in the West Bank. Thirdly, deciding first with ourselves, do we want to live in a democracy or in a Jewish state? Because both don't go together. Those who prefer the Jewish state can continue with the occupation, but then it's not a democracy. Those who prefer democracy must understand that it's either ending the occupation or giving equal rights to everyone who lives under the rule between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Equal rights, one person, one voice. That's my vision. It seems now far-fetched, but I think it's the last one remains. Because it's either we are living in one state. For over 50 years, we are living in one state. The only question is, what is the regime in this state? I would rather see it as a democracy. The only alternative is an apartheid state. There is no third way. So Israel and Palestinians, but first of all, Israel should decide what does it want. Where are we aiming? Another war and another war and another war.
So Gideon said three things. The first, Stephen, is ending the siege in Gaza. The second is no more settlements in the West Bank, and Gideon even characterized the settlers as terrorists. And the third point is deciding whether we want a Jewish state or a democratic state, and Gideon's asserting that those are categorically distinct. And I think what Gideon is saying is that ideally, in his view, he'd have one state where people have equal rights. So let's just go one by one, Stephen.
I mean, like the siege in Gaza, probably, I don't know what the military objective is there anymore. I haven't followed recent news about it, but I don't know if there are any, like how much longer you're going to continue to conduct war there as opposed to moving on to the rebuilding process. So I think that Hamas, my understanding, has more or less been crippled in the Gaza Strip. The blockade should probably be lifted. Obviously, the siege and the military conflict should wind down. I think that's really agreeable. For the West Bank, I think that settlements freezing until an actual peace agreement is reached, I think is good. And that means like really freezing, not the half freezing they did, in like the 90s where they would say no more new settlements, but you could build a house like 3 kilometers away and then slowly build up, like none of that goofy stuff. Like an actual freezing to the settlements, I think would be good as well. The third one, though, is super contentious. You can be a democratic state and still have an idea of like the type of immigration policy that you would support. There's nothing contradictory about having a state that protects a particular character, but also, is democracy. I don't think there's a contradiction there. Israel will never assimilate all 2 and 3 is 5. What is it? 5 million, I think, between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Will never assimilate all of those citizens into their government for one person, one vote, because obviously the Jewish character of the state would disappear immediately. And I think Jewish people, rightfully, historically, fear what would happen, whether it's historically as living other Arabs or historically just being a minority in any area. And 2, because there's absolutely no reason to think that if they were to live in that state and face severe problems, that the international community would help. It's very unlikely they would. It seems to be the case that the international community doesn't help almost anybody in that region. So I don't think that idea of that one state assimilation will ever happen, which is why I think it's probably important to move towards some kind of 2-state solution for any kind of like actual realistic chance at a lasting agreement.
Do you see a situation in which Israel is evacuating 700,000 settlers, part of them violent people, and all of them the strongest political group in Israel? Are you real? You really believe that this is possible? Or do you really believe that there is room for a Palestinian viable state without evacuation of all the settlers? I mean, even though 20% of their land will be populated with violent colonialists?
I think there's plenty of room in the West Bank. There's a ton of room in the West Bank. The idea that it's some stripped land with no space for anybody, I don't think that's true. But I mean, like, there should be some sort of land swap or something should happen to make right what's probably going to be an annexation of more Area C territory to annex the big settler blocks. I agree that more land should be given to Palestinians to make that right, up to 100% or whatever would make that okay. But I don't think the issue is one of space. I don't think that's a real concern.
It's not a question of space. It's a question that there's no room which is Palestinian. It's all for resettlements, deliberately, obviously. You cannot have a state with 700,000 people who will do anything possible to sabotage it. What kind of state will it be? Not to speak about the idea that it should be demilitarized. I mean, Israel has the right to have all the arms in the world, and a Palestinian state, everyone agrees, should be demilitarized. Why? What about their right to self-defense?
I mean, I would hope that the demilitarization thing would be an agreement that would ease over years. I guess as the security situation is assured on both sides. I agree that the West Bank should be contiguous. That the really deep, I think settlements like Yitzhar, like Ariel, there are deep settlements that I think should just be either destroyed or just given to the whatever Palestinian state exists. I don't agree that you can create a West Bank that has all of these random Israeli outposts turned settlements like dotted in between. I agree that those should be gone. I think only like big blocks near the Green Line should be incorporated into Israel proper if an agreement is reached. But there's never going to be a one state. It's just that will never happen, right? There's even moderate Israelis would never agree to be a minority in an Arab. This just would never happen. There's a greater chance that every Israeli, and Palestinian citizen come together tomorrow and sing songs of peace and make a two-state solution before a one-state solution is ever accepted. It would just never happen.
And why do you think, Gideon, that can't you empathize with why Jews would want a Jewish state?
Most welcome. I don't need it. But those who need it, most welcome. But then you have to live in a Jewish state, namely with a Jewish majority. It cannot be a Jewish state with no majority.
But Stephen says that is still, Stephen, you're saying that can still be democratic, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, there's a Jewish majority state right now, but it requires basically the subjugation of the people in the West Bank and Gaza, right? In Israel proper, I believe it's 7 million Jews and about 2 million Arabs. And then there were Palestinian Arabs. And then in the West Bank, I think it's around 5 million. And then I think in the Gaza Strip, I think it's 2 million. Or it might be 3 million in the West Bank. But basically, it would be about an equal number, a little bit favoring the Palestinians there if they were to incorporate everything, which, yeah, obviously. And then plus the right of return would make it so the Jewish people would completely lose their ethnic status and protections as being a majority there, and now they would be ruled by Arabs again. There's no way that even moderate Israelis would never accept that living condition, I don't think.
So Jews from the whole world who have never been here have the full right to come here, and Palestinians who were born here, whose parents were born here, have no right to immigrate here. This sounds to you like justice, right?
I mean, the reality is like they tried to separate the land in 1947, and the Arabs, they didn't want it, and they launched a war of extermination against Israel, and they lost. So I mean, like, this is the situation that we're in now. They tried it again in 1967 and they lost. So I mean, this is the situation as it is now. I agree it's not ideal, but the idea that after losing wars like that it's like, okay, well, all of these refugees that we've like continued to extend generation after generation to, now they all want to come back and live in your state. I don't know any other state that would ever have such a condition like that. It would just never happen realistically.
No, I don't see that all of them will come, but there will be an equal immigration policy.
Wait,
I don't think, by the way, I don't think that all of them want to come. It's always those demons that we build ourselves only to convince ourselves that there is no partner and there is no chance. But what, yes, describe me, you can now decide, Stephen, what will be here in 10 years' time?
What will be what in Israel? What was that?
What will be here in 10 years?
What would be your intent?
In 10 years' time.
Assuming what? Nothing happens right now, or?
Where are we aiming?
Right now, I think Israel is aiming towards destruction. I think that Israeli leadership has very arrogantly assumed that they can just kick the can down the road on the Palestinian problem and ignore it forever. And obviously, that is a huge mistake. It shows a huge amount of hubris. It shows a lot of arrogance. It shows a lot of idiocy. It's not good. Yeah, right now, I think Israel is on a very, very, very bad path because the international community won't bear the Palestinian living conditions for forever. The Arab citizens in the surrounding states probably won't bear it forever. The Palestinians within Israel are a vector through which Iran or other proxies can attack Israel. It's disruptive of the entire Saudi versus Iranian axis to have this problem here. I think Israel's in a very bad spot right now. And I think Israel largely has itself to blame for not being more aggressive in solving this issue. I do agree with that.
So what will change it?
What will change it? Personally, probably nothing. That's what it seems like. It feels like historically the United States has been a big mover of peace. Carter, I think, was a really big reason for peace with Egypt. Bill Clinton really wanted to do something with Arafat and it was Ehud Barak, I think, right? But the right now in the United States, I don't know how much you follow U.S., but our politics are a fucking nightmare here. I don't think any of our American leaders have any mind for the Middle East or any long-term vision. So then it's just the rest of the world. I think Israel probably doesn't trust any other country internationally for good reason. The ICC and the ICJ are quite heavy-handed when it comes to Israel. And obviously they feel surrounded by enemies or supporters of enemies. And even their allies are lukewarm when you look at countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan. But so, yeah, I don't know. It's a really bad situation right now because there needs to be like a heroic leader, like another Rabin, if you'd consider him that, another Sadat, if you'd consider him that. It needs to be somebody like this who wants to come up and make like a hard negotiation. Maybe another Sharon type figure to say, we're taking, half the settlements out of the West Bank in order to make this peace agreement or something like that. But yeah, I don't see an end or anything right now, because both sides just have mutually exclusive desires. I don't know.
And why can't, Gideon, we give more agency to the Palestinians? I hear you when you say there's no symmetry. You're making a comparison to South Africa, a raper versus a rape victim. It is the case that Israel has more power, but do we have to attribute zero agency to the Palestinians? Like, is it really irrelevant that the Palestinians have never agreed to an Israeli state? Does that have zero significance?
You are disconnected. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, let me repeat. So I hear your point about there not being a symmetry between Israel and Palestine because Israel has more power, and therefore the onus for diplomacy is
the occupier. It's not only about power.
They're the occupier. So the
colonizer and the occupier.
So the onus is more on Israel to create diplomacy and justice. But my question is, should we really attribute zero agency to the Palestinians? Doesn't the fact that Palestinians have never agreed to an Israeli state, doesn't that matter at all? I understand they're as you say, the victim, but do we attribute zero agency to them? Shouldn't that matter a little bit?
First of all, Arafat was recognizing the state of Israel, but I don't want to get to this corner because it's not about, when the Palestinians recognize Israel, Israel saying, but they don't. And when they don't recognize it, then they don't recognize it. Those things are marginal. Is there a real will of Israel to perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings, yes or no? And the answer is no, with the capital N. And as long as this is the situation, no diplomacy will solve it, unless the international community will decide that if an apartheid state is unacceptable anymore, that after what happened in Gaza and Lebanon, it is unacceptable that Israel will be part of the liberal world because it is gay friendly. And then we'll see what will be the consequences. Israel will not wake up one shining morning and say, oh, the occupation is not so nice, let's put an end to it. It will never happen.
So what, Destiny, do you agree?
No, I mean, conditions on the ground can change dramatically if the leadership is there for it. But you have to have the leader. Like, no, but I don't think anybody would have thought that Israel could have ever been at peace with any surrounding Arab states. And it took a huge commitment from Sadat, going before the Knesset and speaking to Israelis, and the suspension, I think, of Egypt from the Arab League for, I think, a decade, for him to do that. And it was a really big movement. And it showed that there can be a country that can be at peace with Israel. I think that Begin said, I think he said he would never give anything up to an Arab state. And they ended up giving back the entire Sinai to Egypt. It can happen. Sharon's decision to disengage from Gaza was incredibly unpopular. But he did it. It was probably for the best. He wanted to fully disengage from the West Bank too. That would have been probably even better. I think he ended up pulling out like 9 or 10 settlements, but, there have to be brave leaders to do it. Like there is no Holocaust without Hitler. There is no, peace in the Middle East without without Carter and without Sadat and without Begin. There is like, you need these people, you need these leaders and these figures to come up and make these brave commitments, and the people will change accordingly. The people's moods and minds will change, I think, if leadership is there. Like right now, if you poll people, nobody is in favor of a two-state solution on the Palestinian side or the Israeli side. But if it came out tomorrow that Netanyahu and Abu Mazen came out and they had agreement and they were like, hey, listen, this is what we have. We've agreed to literally everything. You're not going to like some of it. They're not going to like some of it, but here it is. I think people's minds would change very quickly if that was like 100% on the table, ready to be agreed to, and everybody was okay with it in leadership, I would say.
Yes, but listening to you, I come to the conclusion that we will wait now to another leadership. Israel wants justice, but it's just a question of the right leader in the right timing. But my claim is that Israel did anything possible to sabotage any kind of settlement from 67 and maybe from 48. It never had an intention really to give up territories or really to let Palestinians have a sovereign state. Never for a moment. And therefore, I claim that just waiting now for the right leader is just playing into the hands of the occupation. So it will last another 100. Because the right rabbin will not be born.
Stephen, do you agree that Israel has been sabotaging justice from the beginning, like Gideon says?
I think that sabotaging is a rough word, but the way that I would describe it is Israel will like grit its teeth and accept peace. But if the Arabs want to fight, Israel welcomes the fight because it's an opportunity for them to expand kind of their hold on things. But I mean, it takes two to play in that situation, right? Like at any point, a lot of the Israeli project could have been unplugged if the Arab states would have been like, okay, you know what? We will agree to this. Fine. In Lausanne in 52, fine, take the Gaza Strip, 200,000 Palestinians, here's your territory, boom, that's a state. And then you're done. And then you make your Israeli state, and that's it. And Israel doesn't get to expand into the West Bank because there is no 67 war because there's peace. But the Arabs have always been willing to fight because they've never accepted peace. Israel's always been willing to return the fight because it means that they get to expand with this like righteous anger. And both sides have just, been fully incentivized to fight with each other. But as time has gone on, it hasn't gone well, I think, on the Palestinian side. That's why you've seen all of their allies drop off, in the Arab world, where they're finally like, okay, well, fighting with Israel kind of sucks. We're done with it. And now the only allies that are in the Palestinian corner are Iranian proxies. It's not good. And I'm not even trying to say one side is necessarily right or wrong in all of that. I mean, I understand why the Palestinians would fight. Of course, you've got a bunch of Europeans that are coming to settle your land and they bought shit and they kicked you out. And you're like, well, screw this. Like, yeah, of course we're going to fight. But I mean, at some point, it has to, something has to be figured out, permanently. And yeah.
Gideon, what Stephen's saying is that the Arabs have always been willing and trying to fight and not accepting anything. And that's the other half of the puzzle. Do you disagree with Stephen?
I make a separation and differentiation between the Arab states and the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are struggling over their rights. It's the most legitimate struggle. And by the way, even according to the international law, which is irrelevant, there is the right to struggle also in a violent way if it's about your achieving your rights. They are struggling over their rights and they will not stop. I hope they will not stop. The American natives gave up. Maybe the Palestinians will give up one day. Maybe their fate will be the same. But meanwhile, they will continue to struggle. And my main cause is to try to get them their basic rights one way or the other. And it's not about having peace with them. It's about giving them what any other country, any other people in the world deserves. Imagine yourself, Stephen and Jay. They are, I think, the only people in the world without citizenship. Can you imagine yourself? They are not citizens of any state. What does it mean? How can the world accept such a phenomenon that 5 million people have no citizenship? What is it, if not apartheid? How will you call it? Not for a, interim period of time, but permanently, no citizenship, no right of anything. Can it continue like this until the leadership will emerge?
Yeah, I think I feel like we've said our
Okay.
points.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you, I mean, but you think it's bad, right? Okay. I tend to try to drill into things a little deeper than some.
We agree on that it's bad.
So one more point is use of force by Israel against Hamas and Hezbollah. I think Stephen thinks that Israel's actions are some form of justified. I think, Stephen, don't let me speak for you. I know that you've been more
of course. Yeah, against Hamas and Hezbollah, sure.
Yeah.
People obviously can argue over what that looks like, yeah.
Yeah. And to the degree to which it's, I think you guys both agree that what's going on in Gaza is going a little bit far. Maybe they should stop the siege, but more broadly speaking, Stephen, you see Israel's response to Hamas and Hezbollah in the way that, any state has the right to defend itself and would if they're attacked by terrorists, right? There's no state in the world that wouldn't launch a counterattack if, there's rockets flying into their country. But Gideon, I think you see it differently, right? I mean, how do you see Israel's response currently, what's going on in Lebanon and Gaza today? Is it crazy for me to say that's Israel's self-defense? What is it?
It's not a question of right of self-defense. Sure, Israel has the right of self-defense. Sure, no country would remain indifferent after such an horrific attack like on the 7th of October. But this does not mean that after the 7th of October, Israel has the right to do whatever it wants. This does not mean that Israel has the right to kill 42,000 people, 17,000 children. What is it? On behalf of self-defense? This is unacceptable. And more than this, I want to ask, do you really think that Israel is a more secure place today than 1 year ago? I doubt it very much.
Your thoughts, Stephen?
I mean, we can get into the whole war numbers and what's a good number of civilian deaths and not a good number of civilian deaths and whatever. I mean, obviously that's a whole other conversation. I mean, is Israel more secure now than it was a year ago? I mean, probably not. I don't even know if the people living there would feel that way, but I think they would probably rather be in a country where they feel like they can fight for their security rather than just being subjugated in other countries to the whims of the people there, because obviously historically for Jewish people, that doesn't seem to have gone very well.
But do you think that Israel has been justified in their actions in Lebanon this last 2 weeks? Killing Nasrallah, killing all these leaders of Hezbollah, having a ground invasion in Lebanon.
Yeah, Hezbollah is a cancer on the Middle East. It's a cancer to Lebanon. It's a cancer to the Arab citizens of Syria. It's a cancer to Arabs and Israeli citizens in Israel. Hezbollah. I have no love lost for Hezbollah. Yeah.
What do you think, Gideon?
I totally agree. The only question is, was it clever to do it? Will it solve the problem? If it will be solving the problem, if you really think that Hezbollah will be crushed and disappear, it's very good with me. But I have my doubts. We have been in those scenes so many times before. Israel tried to change regimes in Lebanon. Israel tried to crush organizations, to encourage other organizations. It doesn't work. But if it will work, go ahead.
But you think that it's stupid. I mean, you think that I think I've heard you speak about when they killed Nasrallah, you think it's exacerbating the tension, that it's escalating, right? That it's not going to have the consequences for Israel that they want, just the opposite. Now Hezbollah is going to be more emboldened and it's going to spur other terrorists to come out of the woodwork.
History told us this, and more than this, it's very explosive.
So why do you disagree, Stephen? Why do you think it's the right thing for Israel to be attacking Hezbollah in the way they are when Gideon's saying that this could have the counter effect that Israel actually wants?
I mean, I don't know if we disagree. If they want to attack Hezbollah, I think they have the right to. If they want to push the settlements back, not the settlements, but the villages that Hezbollah has built north of the, I don't remember the name of the river that they talk about a lot. The what? Oh, the Litani River. Yeah. If they want to push things back a little bit more there so they can feel more secure, they can do that. But it's like, I don't know if you've ever worked a job where you've got like the big like squeegees where you're pushing the water on the floor and it's raining outside. You're doing that, and it only lasts for so long. Like it's not a permanent solution to anything. It's just, yeah, it's a temporary solution, right? I mean, how many wars in Gaza were there? 2008, 2012, 2014, 2019, if you count the border riots, now 2023, 2020, like how many wars in Lebanon were there? There was the whole civil war in the late 80s, early 90s. There was 2006 for a month, and now there's 2024. Like, it's not a permanent solution. It's not fixing anything. It's just kind of kicking the can down the road. There has to be something more. Yeah.
But on the other hand, Stephen, I mean, tying this into not just Hezbollah, but Hamas, I think that you would say, Stephen, that Israel's use of military force is necessary, generally speaking, to protect Israeli citizens from terrorist threats like Hamas and Hezbollah. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is. But like, you just have to be. It's the Palestinian issue has to be figured out, right? Like, if I lock a bunch of people in my apartment, eventually they're going to get really mad. They're going to try to attack me, and I might even be justified in fighting back against them. But I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Like, something has to be figured out, because if the situation continues now, we return to the status quo. In another few years, there's going to be another terrorist attack, and then Israel's going to they'll have justification to go and fight. But I mean, like, it's inevitable. You're creating inevitable situations where you're going to have to deploy some level of violence. It's going to end up with a lot of civilian catastrophe. Like, yeah. I agree on both ends. They have a right to defend themselves, but they're creating the conditions in which they're being attacked. It's stupid.
So you guys, it sounds like, are in complete alignment on this.
Well, but I place a lot of agency on the Palestinian side, and that I think they really do need to feel pressure to come to the table to negotiate something. I think it's I think there's a big onus on them as well as Israeli leadership.
Do you think they deserve any onus or responsibility, Gideon, to come to the table, even though they're the weaker party? And they haven't, right? I mean, I think it's worth conceding that the Palestinians haven't ever agreed to an Israeli state, and even though they're the victim, they're the rape victim, however you want to characterize them, I don't think it's fair to give them zero agency. I think even if it's 1%, I think they deserve some blame, right?
First of all, in Oslo, they recognized the state of Israel in the Oslo Accords. But I don't think it's important. And if they did, so what? It's about Israel changing its mindset. I repeat myself again and again.
Yeah.
The problem is the Israeli mindset. And the Israeli mindset believes in Jewish supremacy. And as long as this is the case, nothing will change. And my voice is now totally...
Okay. I appreciate you guys doing this. And I try to find points of contention and then try to drill into them. But I was surprised to find how many areas of agreement you have. I mean, apparently, Destiny, you agree that they should probably pull back from Gaza, and that the way they're conducting themselves, even with Hezbollah, is not going to work out for them
in the long run. It works out in the short run, but just not in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah. And you both put blame on Israel, but I think what Gideon is saying is it's, I guess, not relevant, that they did accept an Israeli state in Oslo. Is that not a concession, Stephen? I mean, you said they've never accepted a Israeli state.
I mean, that's a whole other talk, because from Oslo, from the Oslo period up to the Second Intifada, there's a whole range of disagreements over who sabotaged that process more. With I think historians will fight a lot. Your Ilan Pappés will fight against your Benny Morrises. Your Avi Schleims will assign blame to both sides. Like, that's a whole 50-hour. You don't want to academic debate on who's to blame for that. Yeah,
you're like, oh, whatever. Yeah, okay.
Well, like the Oslo Accords were supposed to end, I think, in 5 years. I think that was the interim period. Oslo 1, and then Oslo 2 came, and then you had your redeployment in Hebron, and you had and then in 2000, when nothing happened, right? Well, now everybody's like, well, what the fuck? Like, people say that the Second Intifada started because Sharon walked, to the Al-Aqsa Mosque or whatever. But the reality is people were just really mad that there was no agreement after Oslo 1. Palestinians looked at the Palestinian Authority and they were like, okay, cool. You made us a government that just works for Israel to, beat us up and do security for you guys. What do we get out of it? We have no state. We have no officially recognized government. We have whatever bullshit seat at the UN, but we're not getting anything. And then, yeah, so I mean, I think that Oslo one, I thought was a really good step. And then depending on who you talk to, they'll say it was a really good first step. And other people say it was a complete, total abject failure. And I think there are good arguments on both sides of that, but that's a whole other, conversation, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were saying.
I'm sorry. I'm covering the occupation now for 35 years. And what I saw really very curious when I saw. And it shaped my political views, obviously. But I have the feeling that if Destiny will join me for 1 week to the West Bank and maybe to Gaza, if it will be possible, I believe if he would have seen what I saw in those years, he would have changed his mind. I have this belief because he seems to be a very honest guy.
But you just went to Israel with he went with Yishai Fleischer, your close friend Gideon. He went
Well, yeah, no, hold on. No. That gives a bad impression, okay? Because Yishai gives a very particular view. Yishai is very pro-Zionist. I wish I could remember the settlement that he lives in, but the most hopeless I've ever felt. Right? Does he live in Hebron? There was another settlement nearby that he took me to, and I talked to settlers out there, and that was probably the most hopeless I've ever felt about any peace happening, because those settlers are fucking crazy. The situation in the West Bank is it's a whole other thing. The problem is people make it sound like the biggest issues are like lack of food or lack of whatever. But the real issue is, in my opinion, is humiliation, right? That after October 7th, you have 136 of these random checkpoints. Sometimes they're not even manned, but you might have taken a certain road to get to work or to go somewhere. And now you have to drive, 45 minutes out of the way just because there's some new random bullshit checkpoint. Or if you want to drive into Israel, you've got to wait. I walked down the line of cars and talked to people coming into Jerusalem, and people are sitting, and you ask everybody in the cars, they wait 1 or 2 hours just to get into West Jerusalem. You look after October 7th, all of the work permits were revoked for people in the West Bank. And now what? They have no money to make. They can't do anything. Some of them sneak over the walls, and the Israeli government knows, and they don't do anything because people need to work. And it's just like, it's not good. And you go next to some of these settlements, and you can see immediately you're in a very nice Israeli settlement with running water, with electricity, with electric gates, with men with M4s, and then you look down the hill, and all the Israeli settlements are sitting at the top of these pristine hills, looking down on the valleys of the Palestinian villages with the black water tanks because they don't know if they'll have water 24/7. Yeah, it's not good. It's not a good situation. I agree 100%.
And what do we do? I mean, Stephen thinks, well, what do we do? How do we create peace?
Well, we start with a tour of me and Destiny in the West Bank.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks so much for this. I really appreciate you guys doing this. I mean, any final thoughts, questions? Just we're all here together. Like Stephen from you or Gideon from you. Thoughts, questions, final anything?
No, I appreciate the conversation, Gideon.
Same for me. I just can't talk anymore, so I apologize for this.
So thank you so much. Thank you guys both. And I'm going to end this